Hello and welcome to the GTM Morning Grind podcast. I'm Josh, your host. I'm your friendly marketer, but working to bridge the gap across all GTM functions. That means sales, marketing, CS, and on occasion product. Welcome to our very first season where we're focusing on the trust velocity engine, aiming to break down the silos between these different functions by building up trust between them, as well as enabling trust with your target audience with the goal of closing your sales cycle and improving your brand through trust. Today, I have David, Director of Marketing from Byrd, an Austrian startup company focused on 3PL for e-commerce companies in a lot of Europe, but not all of Europe yet. So David, thank you for joining me. Why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself and your expertise?
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me. As you pointed out correctly, Byrd is a European fulfillment platform, we call it sometimes network. We have locations in Austria, Germany, France, and the UK. And the goal is really to help brands to scale efficiently across markets with the right logistics solution. I randomly stumbled into this startup journey during my studies, which was basically 10 years ago. And I was lucky enough to join a startup that became fairly successful, I would say, because most startups fail within the first 5 years. And we're still around, so I think I was kind of lucky also. And yeah, I basically joined the company building up the first warehouse shelf, and now I'm leading the marketing team at Byrd.
It's exciting. I'm glad to have you. So for some context, all of the other guests I've had and mostly spoken to have operated primarily in the B2B SaaS space. You're one of the first and likely one of the few that will be someone that sits kind of at the intersection of SaaS and let's not call it, what folks might call it is legacy operations, so stuff that actually involves people and in-person processes. In your case, this means fulfillment, warehouses, logistics, all of that. So knowing this, and I know you've been just with Byrd, but I imagine you know quite a bit about the industry. I kind of want to understand your point of view. How did you think about the go-to-market strategy, not just marketing alone, but the go-to-market strategy when you first joined Byrd, and how has that actually shaped the channels, the content, and your general marketing initiatives since then?
Yeah, so coming back very quickly on the point about software versus in-person processes and so on, it's quite interesting because on the one hand, we try to position ourselves, especially towards investors, as tech company and software company. And in fact, we actually don't run our own warehouses, at least not anymore. And for merchants, so our customers, we try to make it as easy as possible to understand what would deliver to them, and what they care about is actually just the fulfillment operations with this additional layer. So this is a little bit the gap that we always have to bridge. And regarding the go-to-market strategy, how it all started when I joined. So as I said, at the beginning, I was just building the warehouse shelves and picking up products from merchants and not being super involved into go-to-market marketing. But something that was always interesting to me was understanding customers, what they're actually looking for, like what are the pain points and what are the solutions that they're looking for. And so I quickly came to the topic of SEO and SEA. And to me, it was also quite logic that this bottom of the funnel approach as startup is quite efficient, because then you really get the demand from merchants that are currently looking for a solution. So you have fairly short sales cycles. So the whole first building block of our strategy was actually capturing demand and building landing pages for Shopify fulfillment. so for Shopify fulfillment solution. So my idea was, okay, when someone searches for Shopify fulfillment solution, ideally they'll go to the first page of Google and find byrd. And this is how we won our first customers, I would say, and helped us to gain traction on top of doing outbounds, which was back then founder-led outbound, so reaching out, like cold calling, cold emails, sending letters and stuff like that. So I would say that those were the two first things we did, but I was always on the inbound side, let's say.
So since this is in the world of e-commerce as opposed to traditional commerce or general supply chain, did you find that the ecosystem was a lot more digital focused than, for example, the commerce counterpart? I ask because I had a brief stint working with supply chain, and everything there was just about who you knew, how long you knew them, and digital capture, demand capture was almost non-existent. And this is still 2024, 2025. So to me, that was a completely different shift in mindset. Would you say that, for example, before and even now, most of your audience actually does live online and convert best from digital initiatives?
This is a good question. I would say that our target audience, our ICP, they're kind of tech savvy and they're digital natives and will do their research for sure online. But since logistics is such a critical backbone of your overall business, I think that those networks that you mentioned, they're actually quite important. So we often hear that the network of investors are quite critical, and then you have certain e-commerce communities, especially in the DACH region, where founders meet each other and so on, quite exclusive, and they recommend 3PLs to each other. So I would say it's both. They're digital natives, they will do their research online, but if they have a recommendation from the network, then they will probably follow this or prioritize this option that was recommended to them, which is also one of the reasons why I think those networks are quite important, but it's really difficult to get into.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think the process of essentially referral-based business growth is hardly a predictable go-to-market strategy. You just got to hope that you've had a good enough set of network. But outside of that, how did you and the team break through and actually get to know these communities and ecosystems? Is that somewhere that you and the byrd team are super active in today?
To be very honest, no, we're not super active in those because I think we're all quite fresh still in this industry, and I think those e-commerce networks really, they're more about the founders that are in those communities. So I've also heard from different stakeholders in those communities that it's actually quite difficult as a service provider to get into this. That's a bit the challenge, that for us as service provider is almost impossible to get into those communities unless you have a founder who prior to that founded an e-commerce business or something like that. Then you can make it. But I think in our position it was always quite tough. I think we tried to be as active as possible. And by now we're fortunately a well-known brand, especially in the DACH region, but not super into those communities, which is why we have to rely on our other skills, I would say, to capture demand and create demand for our service.
Yeah, I know that from firsthand experience. When I was at Innovex, we were targeting supply chain, so specifically 3PL, so organizations kind of like byrd, and we were looking for, or we were providing custom WMS solutions. And I remember it was a really almost impossible shell to crack, because we were showing up at these events or we were creating content and everyone was just like, so what? What's in it for me? Can you show me that you have any actual value add to me? The only way that we were actually able to break into these communities was bringing on board supply chain experts who already were established as experts in the building, who, as they say in English, had like a Rolodex. So just a contact book of people that they knew in the industry, and they already could say, hey, you know, I'm here now. Let's talk about this and how I can help you, which is insane.
Interesting.
Insane.
Yeah. How big were those supply chain teams that you were talking to, approximately?
I think there was typically the person that we were typically targeting might be one person per region, but the organizations were huge. We wanted organizations that had a minimum of 5 warehouses. That was kind of our ICP segmentation, because we were talking about WMS solutions and enablement. So we are partnering with the big WMSs like Blue Yonder. And I'm forgetting what the other one is called, but we were partnering with those major WMS providers to say, hey, listen, we'll help your potential customers with onboarding, implementation, and custom development to make sure that their warehouses are running as efficiently as possible. So yeah, it was hard. It was a big uphill battle. I can tell you that our sales cycle was somewhere like 9 months, which was not something I was ever accustomed to as someone coming from B2B SaaS. The average there is somewhere like 90 to 120 days. So looking at sales cycles, that could be a year, if not longer. I didn't know how to deal with that. I was just like, I don't know how to get a quick win here.
Tough, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but we tried relationship building through digital formats. So what we started to do was we started posting a lot of thought leadership content online, adding people on LinkedIn. So our target audience, these procurement managers or warehouse leaders, adding them on LinkedIn, and then just not sending them cold messaging, but just starting almost, you could call it old school Facebook methodology, which is like commenting on each other's posts to build up a rapport. And then we started adding a newsletter and then tagging these people in newsletters. And the conversion point as a marketing team for us was inviting these folks to actually speak with us in a phone call to see if A, they would do some co-marketing, and then B, if they'd be willing to speak with one of our experts to see if they need help with any implementations. It was a very slow process, I'll admit. Like I said, it was 9 months plus. And yeah, it was tough. So I know where you're coming from. But I wanted to actually hear, just this is a bit of a tangent. I think you have a very unique point of view on this because you've seen Byrd climb exponentially and kind of go through a dip. And I don't mean as overall company performance, but let's say market expectations. So around COVID times, as we all know, everyone was ordering things for home more often. So the entire ecosystem of e-commerce absolutely exploded. And I think that probably maps to potentially very good performance for Byrd. But then COVID ended, people started to look forward to coming back to shop. So e-commerce took a bit of a dip. Can you tell me kind of, as someone who saw that entire wave, and I think now we've stabilized, if not seeing some growth again, can you tell me what some of the signals were for each of the stages? So what were, as a marketer or GTM leader, what were some of the signals that were saying, oh wow, we're seeing some really positive growth patterns, and then after, oh no, things are starting to dip?
So maybe first coming back to the growth patterns, 2022 still Corona hype, early 2022, let's say, still Corona hype, crazy valuations. We also raised 50 million euros of funding in May 2022, I think it was. Coming back again 2 years before that to 20 when Corona started, we saw, as you said, a huge increase in demand. So not only for our customers that had more orders, but also for us on our website for the form submissions to request a quote, which is one of our primary KPIs we look at. We had a surge of 450%, I think, year over year. So there was a lot of growth happening, and we were like, okay, wow, that's amazing. And of course, we also had to increase our sales team to handle all of those requests. What we realized, though, is that many of the customers we had closed during that time were overly ambitious with their estimations. So, and everyone thought that e-commerce is going to continue to increase that way, but quickly, or in 2022 especially, we realized, okay, that wasn't a sustainable growth pattern. It was just a temporary peak, basically, that we were seeing. And many of the merchants basically were going out of business or were struggling. And at the same time, I think that we also, as a company, grew so quickly due to this increased demand that we increased in complexity internally, which led to, to be very honest, processes that were not working that smoothly, which led to customer dissatisfaction, and this leads to customer churn at some point. So when we started seeing customers churning increasingly, I think also for me this was a sign, okay, something has to be fixed now. And this was paired then with not only the post-Corona e-commerce dip, but also with the war in the Ukraine that started, which led to the crazy inflation rates and in general macroeconomic changes, which had an impact on the venture capital markets. And basically the combination of us being in e-commerce and being a startup and in logistics, those three factors made me realize, okay, now it's gonna be challenging. And this is where we had to restructure as a company, which was painful, but I think, the right decision, and I think we still managed quite well compared to also other competitors. We were not the only ones. There were also other competitors struggling, being taken over, shutting down, you name it. So coming back to your question, the indicator was basically, okay, churn rate is increasing, the NPS scores don't look great, we get a bunch of negative reviews on TrustPilot, which then makes it difficult to win new customers because you're in sales conversations and then they say, hey, I saw this review on TrustPilot or on Google or whatever. I think I'll pick the competitor. So this is where it started to get challenging, and which made us change the structure and processes entirely, which wasn't only related to marketing, sales or whatever, but in general as a company.
Yeah, that's really rough. I think it's quite rare for marketing to have as close a look at churn rate, NPS scores, and focusing on retention as you and your team did. What, aside from trying to save the TrustPilot reviews from tanking, what was an adjustment you made to recapture the trust of your target audience and to help with the efficiency of the conversion and reduce that ultimate churn rate?
I would say that it was partly out of our control, but what I always believed in what marketing should do is to help customers be happy and to help customers getting education, um, helping them to grow, because in the end it's then good for the company. Um, and there's not so much that we can do, as I said, but we always tried our best as a marketing team to contribute to that improved customer experience. So we were always in touch. We were always in touch with our customer success teams to actually fix those problems and improve customer education. For example, also in the course of the onboarding process, to streamline and improve the flow, how you get the emails, which content you get at which stage when you start with byrd, all those things. But when we saw that, okay, there was actually a real big gap in the customer experience, we tried to strengthen that relationship with the customer success team and to work on even better content and see what are the main issues. Also getting in touch then with product, so trying to be a bit the shareholder that connects the dots within a company to fix certain issues. Maybe that's also due to the fact that I've been in a company since so many years, so I think that this position allows me to have this involvement. But I think this really helped in the long run and to fix certain issues. And another thing that we did from a marketing perspective when it comes to lead generation is to actually change our mindset, which KPIs we care about or what we try to look at when it comes to high quality leads, because we then get more and more feedback seeing, as I said, those customers that were overly ambitious that started within during Corona times. Part of the reason was that they always stated, okay, our forecasted volume is XYZ. So we adjusted our request form on our website saying, okay, first you indicate how much volume you have, and then we add another layer saying, hey, is this now existing volume or forecasted volume? And this helps us to prioritize the leads accordingly and also identify, again, which channels, which pages, which campaigns actually work to generate those leads that have existing volume and that have significant volume for us and the right product category. So this is one thing we changed in terms of like ICP focus to be a bit stricter with our lead classification and what we want to achieve, basically.
I think that's a expert play in refining your ICP and refining your product market focus. No. Why am I forgetting what the F stands for in PMF? Product market fit. because at a certain point, if you're just bringing this inbound, like having that layer of qualification is super important. And I think that's a conversation that so many companies are having today. How do you determine intent? How do you refine who you bring in? And there's not enough organizations that are actually talking about what are the important disqualification factors. Like, what is a company that wants your product, but they're probably not going to be a good fit because, hey, realistically, they're not going to be able to get the best value from what you provide to them. But what I wanted to dig in and ask about, which was your point about working with CS and product on content. So I imagine a good bit of this ended up becoming enablement content of a certain kind, but who are the folks that you brought in to actually create the content? Did that live entirely in marketing's hands? Were you working with technical experts? Walk me through that process and what kind of content did you guys actually create?
A lot of the content is coming from our director of product, who shares basically the upcoming feature releases, service updates, and so on. And then also some developers in general that are a bit more experienced and with certain niche topics. I don't know, when it comes to our integrations with the e-commerce systems, where then certain developers are really deep in the topic and they actually worked on the implementation for a specific customer that is not now going to be rolled out to all customers. Then it's actually best to talk to those guys to understand, okay, what was the request from the customer? What is their use case? Because otherwise you get fairly generic input from director of product, not his fault or whatsoever, but he basically doesn't know why certain things are built that way specifically. But with the developer, okay, this was the request from the customer. This is how they implemented it in Shopify, because he actually made sure that this is implemented this way in Shopify. And then they get really this thought leader content and detailed content that you can also use and educate and other customers that actually haven't thought about this use case. Oh, okay, now I can, with this new feature, I can implement the communication to my online shoppers this way or whatever. So I think that's incredibly helpful. So yeah, I think that's probably the best example. Let's keep it with this one.
Did that content actually, did you find that it was converting a lot better than what you might have been historically creating? Or what was the ultimate shift when you kind of focus on this subject matter expert level content?
So this was not specifically for our customers, so I'm not sure how we would measure the conversion in terms of content.
Perhaps by, maybe retention, expansion, rate. Like if that helps. Yeah. Oh, yeah, open rate, I suppose, yeah.
Yeah, open rates or click rate, basically. I would say yes, that there's certainly some improvements that you can see. I don't have any specific numbers
That's right.
for that. But yeah, I think that's something that we can also improve, is then leveraging this content for external purposes and seeing, okay, how this translates into better campaigns on LinkedIn with increased engagement rates and so on. This is something that we're working on, but all a matter of prioritization, I would say, as usual.
I wanted to kind of also drive this into the direction of how your team is evolving now. So I've been following Byrd for some time, and I know you all had the more traditional approach of exactly, so a little bit more technical content focusing specifically on the e-commerce and Shopify space. But I noticed as of late that you started to take a more modern kind of TikTok and Instagram style approach to building that target audience and becoming a little bit more human and humorous in the output that you're putting out there. How's that actually converted so far? How's your audience perceiving it? How's your team perceiving it? Are you seeing any significant changes or improvements in applying this new methodology?
Yeah, maybe to give some context, I think first of all, coming back to our target audience and how they're behaving online and where they're actually spending time online, I think one shift that I've seen now recently on LinkedIn and also on Instagram in some cases is that e-commerce supply chain is gaining in importance on those platforms. So I think in the past, what you were seeing was a lot of those e-commerce marketing agencies and, I don't know, Shopify agencies just putting out a lot of content, and it was all about conversion rates and increasing your sales for Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and also this topic mostly about marketing, promotions. And now I think there is increasing attention, probably also due to the fact that I'm in this bubble for sure, but still I think there is more and more content about logistics as bottleneck and or as actually growth factor, how logistics is really critical for e-commerce businesses. And I see more and more supply chain managers COOs and so on posting content on LinkedIn and sharing insights. This is how we prepared for Black Friday, Cyber Monday. This is how we reduced our peaks to have less temporary workforce and so on. So I'm observing that our stakeholders that were not on those platforms a few years back are now getting on that posting train as well. Not sure if this is coordinated by the companies or if it's their own ambition, but I think it's great because it gives some insights that you didn't know before. And also on Instagram, you have some supplement brands that show their warehouses and what kind of automations they have and how critical this is that in order to deliver those parcels to consumers in time. So I think this is one shift that we're seeing, and this is why I think that it also makes sense to change our approach a little bit and be more active in creative ways on those social platforms, and especially now in times of AI, and basically everyone is getting flooded with content and it's overwhelming, and you see so much stuff, you have to stand out in some way. And I don't think that you will do that by doing just the classic framework that everyone was taught a few years back. But I think you have to be open for new ideas. And I'm lucky enough to have someone in my team who is really young and different generation, and she sees her own trends on TikTok. And I'm always saying, please come up, like, I'm open for any idea that you have, anything that you see that you find funny, you and your friends, something that is not in my bubble. Just bring it up and I'd be happy to discuss. So I think it's about encouraging your team to come up with their maybe crazy ideas and just give it a try. And so this is not a context. It took some time now. But what we have seen is really that, considering that it is a brand channel on LinkedIn, which always gets less awareness than personal or profiles, I think that the performance is actually quite good, and we have heard some positive feedback from external stakeholders, but also within our company, we have people really engaging with the content and liking the content. And I think also maybe from an employer branding perspective, this is then really beneficial. So yeah, I'm quite happy about this shift, and I think the team is doing a great job.
Yeah, to be honest, I found corporate branding to be so boring over the past 15 years. I don't know what forced it, but I mean, at least on the consumer side, we saw all of these brands always forcing and working with creativity. And then in the 2000 and 2010s, everyone wanted to, put up their ties and sound super professional, and then everyone sounded exactly the same. And we got to this shift where everyone started to take a little bit more personality and personalized approach. And that brings us to today, which, funny enough, we're again addressing this topic because with AI, everyone is able to create the same stuff again and again. So it's always interesting to hear how companies like Byrd are taking the more, let's call it, human approach nowadays, and finding creative ways to say, hey, listen, we actually have a personality. This is how we differ from someone else. You know? So last question for you before we close out. It's more in line with that topic, and it kind of, I think, wraps everything together for us. I know it was a hard shift. So coming out of the Corona times and having to focus on effectiveness and efficiency, and it's something like the rest of B2B SaaS is seeing now with the application of AI. Teams are having to work in a much more lean basis to provide higher quality output and efficiency. how did you actually go in and determine which tactics worked best so to invest more into? And then how do you now say, listen, these are the things that we're going to experiment with when you know that you have the limitations? Like you can't just say, hey, I'm going to be doing all of these cool experiments at once. Like you have to be really deliberate with what you experiment with.
So you mean in general, which tactics, which marketing tactics we should focus
Yeah, like
on?
so how do you determine, okay, what's going to be your best investment? So when you're becoming more lean, how do you select which channel or which activity is going to be the best way forward? So then you have some opportunity to experiment with new and different methods in the future.
So to be very, very honest, at the moment we're mostly focusing on the stuff that we know is working. So we're still very much inbound driven from a commercial perspective. So most of the deals we create are coming from inbound marketing. And this is why we're trying to invest our resources into optimizing this approach and considering that was a still challenging e-commerce market. I think it's really important to focus on this aspect because we know that's working. So even sometimes I think, okay, that's not the right approach, because if you want to find an established retailer that is already working with a competitor, you probably need to do LinkedIn and blah 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 and whatsoever. But what I'm seeing increasingly over time now, since luckily I've been around for quite some time, so I've gathered my insights, they will still end up searching for a fulfillment solution and find you. So this is why I think this is still the most important thing, at least for us, is really continuously optimize this, and then on top of that build our brand, because we see that actually deals that we have closed and had engagements with our LinkedIn content tend to be a better ICP fit. So yeah, this is what I'm trying to focus on, is really the coming back to the lead qualification, just evaluating, okay, those are the channels, those are the pages, those are the campaigns that are contributing to really ICP fitting deals that we're creating, and then just maximizing this. And then we're currently launching a few other projects, so we don't have a lot of time, resources, money to actually experiment with new stuff. So I'm trying to keep my focus, and I think that's also learning basically to say no to many different opportunities and say, okay, we could experiment this, we could try to change the color of the button, whatever. So trying to focus on what's working and maximizing the output with this. And I would say this works quite well for us. I know it's not the most fancy answer and maybe not the right one or not the best one, but sometimes things are not rocket science.
I would disagree. You know, I think a lot of marketing, and let's call it GTM as a whole, has gotten too, let's say, romanticized with that idea of launching everything at scale without saying, hey, hold on, let's cut back. Let's see what's working and see if we can make what's working even more efficient and focus in on that. Like it doesn't always make sense to add something new if there's opportunity to expand on what works today, especially if what works today isn't at its most efficient or most, I don't know if this is a word, convergent, convertant, if it has the best opportunity to, you know, do well for you. So I mean, that immediately threw my question out the door. I was going to say, okay, if you could run one test and one new thing, what would you do? You gave me the answer. You said your answer was, I would not. I'd rather that we focus in on a few special things, which is, I think, probably not answered in as much as it should be. So I'm going to close this out today. But before we do, David, is there anything you want to tell us about yourself? Anything new that's happening about Byrd? Anything that needs to get a little bit more spotlight in your world?
I haven't prepared for this question. I wasn't ready. It's maybe just one interesting observation, because I was always, like, as I said, I joined Byrd basically a student. I was still then studying for 2 years, and super junior, very young company, first time founders. So also I had learned most of the stuff on my own, and I always thought, okay, everyone else is an expert and they know what they do and whatever, and I need to learn how other companies are doing it. And then you realize everyone is in the same situation, and everyone is just learning on the go. You might have people that are posting super smart stuff on LinkedIn, but if you actually look behind the curtain, it's not that special, and they're probably overselling in many cases, which is fine. I think overselling is part of doing business also. But yeah, for me, this was quite insightful that also experienced marketers don't know it better in many cases, and they're just overstating their performance. And one other interesting factor was that, once again, last time I promised coming back to the lead qualification, lead scoring process, where I realized, okay, actually I have to adjust how I look at our KPIs, because I always thought that the MQLs that we're getting, and they're saying, okay, we ship 1,000 orders a month, and that's great, and I'll just trust this, I'll hand it over to sales, and that's fine for marketing. We're growing as a company, everything is fine. I thought that this shift that I then had to do into like focusing more on, okay, how is this actually translating into pipeline generation? How does it translate into into a customer growth at a later stage, like after they're onboarded with us and they start shipping? I thought this was solely about our business, but then actually during the same time I have the feeling you had this shift also in the marketing landscape, with more and more marketing agencies putting in front the revenue marketing, and it's all about cross-functional work, and you have revenue operations and all that kind of stuff, and it's not about MQL and the white paper playbook is that and whatever. And I thought it was just not sure if it was a coincidence. Probably somehow it was, but partly not. Thought it was really funny that basically the B2B marketing landscape, let's say, evolved in a similar way as my journey at Byrd. And so you might find yourself also in that position. So yeah, it's just my last wise words, more or less.
Hey, that's really sound advice. I think a lot of us face imposter syndrome, and hearing that we're all kind of stumbling along the way, I don't know, it's been reassuring to me time and time again that honestly, it's oftentimes good not to have the answer, because we're all just figuring it out as we go.
Exactly.
But anyway, thank you so much for joining me today, David, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much for having me, Josh. It was a pleasure.